Sure, you want to introduce?
Sure, go ahead and introduce. That's fine.
Well, it's a pleasure to have the Reverend Dr. David Gortner with us this evening, who is also the rector at St. Luke's in Coeur d'Alene, to speak with us about evangelism, sharing this good news that we know in Jesus. And we will be recording this, as you just heard, and we might circle back around when we get a larger crowd and do some additional things. So stay tuned for that in the future. So with that, thank you, David.
Super. Thank you, Susan. I'm delighted to be with you all this evening. And we all survived the snow. I don't know if it's this way everywhere across the diocese. How deep was it where you were? Let's just hear from folks.
About 14 inches.
About 8 inches.
Yeah. Wow.
Whoa. About 7 inches.
7 inches in Moscow.
Yeah.
Dana, how about you? What? Gotta unmute you.
Oh, unmute. Okay. Yeah, unmute. 14 inches.
Okay. And Dana, you have to unmute.
Okay, I had 2 inches and no one else around me. Sunnyside didn't have it. Nobody else had it, just where I was in. I'm living in Toppenish now, and I got it here. So there we are.
Not bad.
Yeah,
Thomas.
it'll do.
Like Dana said, we have no snow in Sunnyside, and as far as I know,
Yeah.
there's snow in Grandview.
Yeah.
Or Zilla, or anywhere else.
Okay. So some of us were blessed more than others, and you can decide which way that blessing went.
Yeah.
So tonight's topic of evangelism, that's one that I've been teaching on and training on and trying to lead clergy and lay people in the practice of for actually now probably close to 20 years. And there's a book that I got to write as part of one of the last teaching series by the Episcopal Church. It was on a variety of leadership topics, and evangelism was one of them. It was not the first book that I wanted to write for them. There were other topics. I thought, well, how about congregational and organizational leadership? I think I could do that. And they said, no, we think you'd be really good to write evangelism. And I said, well, how about Christian formation? Because, I think I could do that. And they said, no, really. So I ended up writing a book on evangelism, and, my humor with the Episcopal Church at that point around the topic, and this was before Michael Curry, was in the land of the blind, the one-eyed person is king, and so, I was finding my way through what evangelism might mean for the Episcopal Church, where we have a different sensibility about what we're doing with our understanding of the gospel. We don't necessarily come at this with, and we don't come at our neighbors with the sense that we are the bearers of the light going out into the outer darkness where there is no light. Rather, we have a sense of God is already at work among people, and the first task of evangelism is to go out and bear witness to the light that is already there, and naming and celebrating and bearing witness to, and helping people to see for themselves the light that is already God at work in them, and through them and around them, and bearing our own story along the way. So what does that look like? So I began to put a book together, and then there's this, I'll share with you the book cover. And one of the things I learned in writing this book was try to have, when you're an author, try to have some say over what the book is going to look like. Because the cover, these were all the same kind of cover for the series. transforming evangelism, transforming leadership, transforming Christian formation. But look at this picture. All these happy robed people in front of stained glass windows, singing, smiling out of the prayer book. Now, that doesn't scream to me evangelism. It says something nice about a community gathered in church, but I would have much rather had a picture of someone standing at an arched door looking out into the world, or two people on a park bench talking to each other while the busy world is going on around them. Because evangelism is about communication, about that exchange that happens outside our doors. Now, there's evangelistic work and practice that happens in how we share with one another in our congregations too, but it really is something that happens outside. So what I thought tonight I'd like to do with you all is walk through a congregational plan that I developed and did some work with a church in Southwest Washington, D.C. That was an interesting small congregation in a soon to rise and grow big neighborhood, up and developing area along the river, that had been the church home for Thurgood Marshall. And they were inheritors of his library. It's an interesting area because there's a lot of publicly or HUD-funded public housing and lower income housing, as well as long-standing middle income, middle class condos and apartments and townhomes. And then the thing that was taking over the riverfront was high-end condos for people with big boats and whatnot. So, it was a changing landscape, and they were sitting right at the center of it. Their building they had sold their property to be redeveloped, and like 2/3 of their property was going to become condos, luxury condos. But the front third of their property was to be the church, and it was to go vertical more instead of horizontal, and had this glass front that was going to be looking out on the street, down, looking along this beautiful, newly developed corridor that included the Arena Theater that was going to be a major attraction for the city. And there were about 40 folks in the congregation. For the time that they were homeless, or borrowing space at a I think it was the basement of either a UCC or a Unitarian church that they had use of. We set to work on practicing evangelism and making community connections and building bridges so that the connections were being made, so that there was more of an influx of people, so that when they had their first public worship and there was a glass front where people could see in, they would see a room that was a little fuller than half full, where before it would have looked like maybe a quarter full. Because those kind of optics also matter to people. So let me walk you through some of what we did. Just a moment, I need to get to the screen. So this was a 4-feature plan for preparing for the relaunch of this congregation. There were four key things we were wanting to do. One is for individuals within the congregation to go out and have evangelistic conversations. That means kind of conversations that are full of holy curiosity with people in the neighborhood. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that was one component, and that took some practice and training, and then intentional invitations into personal circles. And then building partnerships, bridge building for creative neighborhood partnerships with the library, with the Arena Theater for possible, not just space use matters, but programmatic possibilities for the theater to come in and do something that would have some on-point value for the church, religious and moral. And then planning, intentional launch planning for what is it going to look like when we get our new building and we're going to kick off? How are we going to do this well? So those were the 4 components that we talked about. So the evangelism is the person-to-person kind of work, places to meet people here. And part of it was, where do people meet? Where is it possible to go and connect with people in this neighborhood, this community? Are there parks? Turns out there was a big supermarket that had a whole like almost like a food court foyer in front of it that people could bring in their laptops or just sit and have coffee, and with open windows to the street. And when it was nice, there were seats outside as well. So that was a major location. The library was another. The arena stage was another. The waterfront was another. So we began to identify places where people might congregate, where you could meet and just chat people up. And then, of course, there are the typical places like Starbucks or, just walking along the street, because when the weather's nice, people might be out on their porches and whatnot. So opening some conversation. Then inviting. This was an intentional ask of the people in the congregation. Said, I want you to write down 4 people that you have either had some conversation with church or with faith about, or maybe you haven't yet, but think you could, and invite them to come to a service, especially invite them to come to when you launch in your new building. So I asked people to write down who I'm going to invite and why I want to invite this person. What in the person is speaking to me in terms of their interest, in terms of what they might bring, in terms of their hunger. And then bridge building. Who can we connect with as we're going to have this new building, and we're going to have this new presence in the community? Who do we want to be connected with? And this was a church that had relationships for a long time with different organizations, including other congregations. Lutheran or a Jewish congregation shared the building at one point. So they were very good at sharing, but usually what motivated their sharing was financial. That they got some rental use from the organizations or other congregations that used the building. And it wasn't necessarily a partnership in ministry or in social outreach or just faith life in the city. So I asked them to think about what kinds of partnerships they could form that have that at the root. And then the last was what's most important about, in this case, St. Augustine's was the name of the church. What's most important about this church? So part of the launch planning was, I want you to come up with a document, actually more like a flyer or a little folding brochure that describes what's most central and important and distinctive and enduring about St. Augustine's or about your church? What is it that is distinctive about this way of faith in a world where you can find any variety of different slices of Christian faith or other faiths? What's most distinctive here? Why is St. Augustine's important in this part of the city and in your life? So these were some of the questions that were asked in evangelism, starting with walks in the neighborhood, asking people, how is God at work here? Before you even have a conversation, just do a kind of prayerful walk. Say, God, show me what, help me see the light that is here. Help me see your presence that is here and where you're at work. And that really does change perspective on what you see as you walk. How is God at work in my life? That's the practice part of being able to even tell myself my own story of how God is at work in my life, as well as tell that story to others. And then what moves people here? What is it that is important, that is a yearning, a deep concern, a passion, a delight? What gets at people's deeper heart or gut? And so this was all stuff that teams went out and practiced together. And I have some stories that are fun about, I had some seminarians who were working with the members of the congregation going out, and there was this one great moment where one of my seminary students was out with another church member, and they were walking a neighborhood, and she was great. The student was great at just approaching people. There was a family out, or a couple out on their porch, and they waved hi, and she waved hi back, and said to the guy with her, "Come on, let's go." And they approached and started a conversation. And the church member who was going with the seminarian was a little unsure about all of this, but then he got really excited about learning about how both the man and the woman on the porch were cooks, and they started talking about food. And then the church member got very excited because they had a commercial grade kitchen that was planned for their new church, and he started thinking about, might they be interested in being part of the food service that we provide to the community in the future. So he started thinking about connectional possibilities, and that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't approached and had the conversation with folks in the first place. Let's see, just what do I want to do here? So with inviting, that's pretty straightforward. What are 4 people that you want to invite? And actually here it says every member invite 10, but bring 2. So, you have to make more invitations than you can actually get people to do something, right? Think of when you do a dinner party, or when you're inviting someone to serve on a committee, or when you're, those don't belong in the same sentence, but the people have the right of refusal, of course, and so so it takes more of a range of asking and inviting, but be clear about why you want them to come, and even say that to, in some ways to them. I think you would find this a great experience, and I've heard the stories in your life of where you've actually maybe been hurt by the church, but I thought maybe you might enjoy tasting something a little different than what you've experienced before. And then the bridge building, some of what we were asking folks to think about is, what kind of partnership can you enter into that that brings people into the church, and not just as a space, but brings people here into the building, but not just for the building's sake, but it also opens conversation, and you're intentional about opening conversation. So I took the rector over to the Arena Theater for a conversation with some of the folks that were there on staff. And we met the building manager, who turns out had been in a number of different bands as well. He was still a musician, and I was just kind of letting the conversation unfold. The rector was getting excited about, oh, I wonder if he'd like to come and play. And I had to kind of say gently later, you know, I know that was exciting, but slow the conversation down, because really what's at the heart of the conversation at this point is connection with the person, and then opening possibilities of exploration of partnership. And then the launch planning is, you know, what is God calling us to become for this church in this new building? But that's a question at any point for any of our congregations. And what needs to change and develop in order for us to become that next thing? And then how do we hold up our best? And what is it that is our best that we wish to hold up before people, verbally and also in public media, whether it's brochures or online? And what's distinctive about us? Why are we here? So that's a lot of what we did. Let's see, I don't think there's anything remarkably new here. Yeah, before we go on, what occurs to you as we've talked through that kind of overall plan? Because what I was trying to do with this congregation was a scope of evangelistic work that was, yes, at its heart, really about the conversations and about that open engagement with other people about our own story, but also inviting their story, and celebrating and naming how the holy is at work in their lives. That's one, but the direct invitation is an easy, but not always, well, it's simple. It's not always easy to do, right? Thing. And to do it in a planful way of, you know, what's the event that we really want to invite for? How do we plan that event so that it is as welcoming, as displaying clearly of our faith as possible? And then the partnership building is about relationships institutionally in the community, that gives a grounding to the congregation as a whole with other organizations. And then the launch planning is its own bigger thing of what's the face we believe is faithful for us to have for the public, that is true about who we are, but that holds up what is distinctive about us. So, thoughts before we go any further? What has occurred to you or come to your mind? Where is your own congregation in this kind of work?
I was just going to say what came to mind for me, David, is how contextually specific this work is. In the work that you were doing with that congregation, it had to be about exactly what was there, what the congregation had been, and what was available to them in that community.
Yes. Yes. The quadrants or the components don't necessarily change, but what your focus is very much about where you are, right? the people that are around you, and who you are as a congregation and as a people.
My question is more about our own congregation and how we introduce this concept to them. We talked about trainings and other things like that, but just how the logistics, how do you go about that, and what sorts of things do you discuss?
Yeah. That's great. So again, with the congregations that I've been invited to go to do some work with, we do some exercises. First, we have to kind of open up the jar, the Pandora's box of evangelism, and let the ghosts go away and get to the gem that's, really there. And part of that process is the types of conversational practice that I ask people to engage with each other. So there's pairing up on some basic things about share something that's delightful in your own life, and listen to one another, and there's a couple of stages to go through that. There's an exercise of this starts better for the introvert. Everyone write a list or write down a series of scriptures, hymns, stories, people, art from the Christian tradition that it really is something that you treasure and why you treasure it. Write that down. Now, after you've written it down, share a little bit with each other about why it matters, right, to you. Because that's not just the scripture, but it's your personal story in relation to the scripture, right? And then, go out and do the faith walk in the community. Go out and see. Ask people some questions, so these are practices that we lead people through, and that I was leading this congregation through, and at the same time we sat down as a vestry and as church leadership, and walked through, okay, who are the organizations around here that are doing some interesting things that we would want to connect with? Who have we connected with before? How can we deepen that connection? And then who's going to help take the lead on that? The inviting exercise just needs some introduction, but it's always good to have invitation linked to a campaign of invitation linked to some particular things that you would like people to experience at your congregation. I think about Camp Cross and the invitations to certain events, including join us for the cleanup day, or for paint and fix, and bring a friend. Those are events that then get framed in a certain way so that people don't just have the experience of going out and wielding a hammer, but there's something more to the event than that, right? It may be join us for this particular type of worship that we're doing on this particular day. It might be like what we were doing at St. Luke's with this whole effort of building civil discourse, or rebuilding civil discourse around tough topics. So a documentary and discussion series. We found partners in the area, the Human Rights Education Institute and the Museum of North Idaho. And then we found North Idaho College was willing to have us in for one of the sessions. And there were a couple of other partners. And invitations went out from all of those to come to these events and experience a way of having conversation with each other that is safe and healthy. what is it that you want to hold up, and then how are you going to make the invitations wide and personal?
Mhm.
So I don't know, Diane, if that's helpful, but that's kind of the levels of conversation we went through.
Okay.
The last thing I'll say about with St. Augustine's was interesting, because it was a homeless congregation, right? At this point, they didn't have a house of worship of their own anymore. The rector and I agreed with the vestry that we would close St. Augustine's for 2 weeks. That we would St. Augustine's has ceased to meet. Because that is a possible future.
True.
And during this time, what we want you to do is go in pairs, trios, small groups to other congregations around the city.
Mhm.
And then come back and, we'll gather in the evening for soup and bread and conversation about what we experienced in other places.
Mhm.
And so we had this list of, here's what we experienced at these different churches, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And okay, now let's go back and talk about what St. Augustine's has been at its best and where there have been weaknesses. And so that shutdown gave them a different perspective on what they valued and treasured most in their congregation.
It's a great way to use that opportunity.
Yeah. So, I mean, you figure out what's going to work.
Mhm. Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
With St. Andrews, we love food. So it's a lot easier to invite people to what we do best, and that's hospitality. So, and it gives them an opportunity to kind of meet us in a setting that is more comfortable for people than just inviting them to church.
Mhm.
Plus, we always avoid the E word whenever possible, because they're
Called
just
evangelism.
Yeah, I know. But they don't realize they're doing evangelism. All they're doing is inviting them to like a potluck, or inviting them to a breakfast, or inviting them, and then they get to know us outside of so especially on-church people don't feel like they're having religion shoved down their throats, because that's when it becomes difficult for not only for people to ask. So we invite them into hospitality. Like I said, we love food. So we're always doing something with food. And then the other thing too is I like your focus on partnerships, because as a small congregation who has empty rooms, when we speak of partnerships, everybody automatically assumes that we are looking for people to rent our building for some reason. But the reality is that we need to develop partnerships. And then if God willing, somewhere in that partnership, maybe not with that organization, but word of mouth gets around, and we might find someone who might need to rent a few of our empty spaces. But that should not be our primary focus. Our primary focus should not be about finding a tenant. It should be about building up our capacity in our community.
Yeah, right. And so, some of what I said to St. Augustine's again was, if you're looking for a rental agreement, write into your rental agreement something besides money, that's actually on mission, on point with what you're trying to be or what you're hoping to grow into as a church and as a body of organizations together. So that's great. And the other thing I was thinking was the hospitality with food is great. What's the conversation? How much are people actually able to enter the conversation with people so that there's that reveal of I am a real person, and to be able to speak with gentleness, yeah, and I'm a child of God, and so are you, and just little seeds, and that just let it
Mhm.
drop and let it fade, and what people pick up from that is for them to pick up.
Yeah. Good point.
Let's see, there was, and then this actually brings me to, there's anothere'd my slides go? Down here a little bit. This is worth more discussion, but not now. So I'm going to pop down here. This is, I borrowed this from Ed Wimberly's book on one of his early books on African American pastoral care. He's a pastoral theologian, and he talked about how the way pastoral care happens in a lot of African American congregations that he was acquainted with just was different than what was happening in Anglo congregations. And it was the nature of the conversation. And part of it was the way certain white European root folks learn to, especially psychologically trained or trained in counseling or trained in pastoral care that's been influenced by those fields, learn to listen in a way that did this. Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. I hear you saying, right? And it all became focused on your story. And I'm not allowed to bring my story into the conversation, right? Much less a greater story, because it's all about, but in other cultures and communities, and I would say largely it's true for people in general, if they're the only ones speaking into the room, that's a little dissatisfying after a while, unless you're a narcissist, right? So the way conversation was happening in African American congregations that he was seeing was this exchange that was very dynamic and almost speaking into each other before someone else finished. But it was an exchange back and forth. Your story, and here, let me offer something from my story or from the great story or from scripture. And there might be a yes or a no in response, but it had that dynamism to it and that energy to it that just grew as the conversation unfolded. So that to me struck at the heart of what an evangelistic conversation, or a conversation with a spirit of evangelism and holy curiosity and naming the holy is, that I bring something that I can share from myself into this, not to take over, but to echo or to join with or to offer a contrast, or just as an offering from myself. And then most fundamentally, I want to hear your story. I want to hear what it is that matters to you and why, and then in relation to this, the great story. How do stories from scripture or from the Christian tradition tie into how are we part of that greater story, and what other stories come to mind? And so what you begin to do is weave something that has some beauty to it, but with gentleness, and always very much focused on hearing someone else's story and then naming the holy that you hear in someone's story. So that's one. And that's the art is gentleness. but not shyness. There's a difference, right? So, so a gentleness might be, well, there was a student that had a wonderful conversation with a guy in Union Station in train station in DC. He was, since he had the assignment of going out and having such a conversation, he was like other students, he was looking for clues of someone he could connect easily with. And so he saw this guy who was carrying around that book, The Shack. Some of you might remember that book. And I can talk to him, right? So he went up and started a conversation, and they chatted a little bit about The Shack, but then my student asked the question, what do you do? And what's your career? What do you do for a living? And he said, I am the regional organizer for all the school bus routes for the DC school district. And so the student was curious. I mean, this was that moment of curiosity. How did you find your way into that? What led you into that? And that sounds really interesting, but rather than, tell me how you make it work, he was more curious about how it was the vocational path, right? How did you come to this? And the man shared a story that he said, when I was in school, we struggled, and it was a rough neighborhood that I came from, but the bus was like my favorite place. I loved getting on the bus and going to school and coming back, and bus drivers were keeping us safe and keeping us in line somewhat. And I thought it was a wonderful experience, and I wanted to make sure other kids had the same experience that I did. And so then my student took that moment and named the holy. He said, that's amazing. And it almost sounds to me like a calling, like that was God's calling for you. And the guy kind of stepped back a little and shuffled his feet and looked at his feet a little, and they talked about something else for a little bit. But then at the end of the conversation, he came back to the topic and said, my wife said something like that to me once as well, that maybe that's a calling. And I'm going to think about that some more. That's a beautiful, successful evangelistic conversation. So that's and there's a bit of the there was very much a focus on your story side. My student didn't have as much from his own story to share in that one, but the great story came in, right? So that's more background. I would hope that the next time that we do something together, we might actually do the breaking off into pairs and doing a little practice time with each other on some of the conversations. It's a gentle opening of, ways of sharing ourselves and ways of inviting the sharing of others.
David, I just want to point out that story is wonderful, because I've run into people who have like what they consider ordinary occupations, but they don't realize what a difference that it actually makes.
Yes.
In the bigger picture. And having someone acknowledge that is like it probably made that person's day, just having someone recognize their importance in the world. Because I've had people, when we talked about, pray without ceasing because the work that you do should glorify God. And they go, well, I'm an accountant. And it's like, how can being an accountant glorify God? And it's like, it's your intention. It's like some people are great accountants. Other people suck at numbers, and we need everybody. We need everybody. And in order to make this world run. So, never discount what you do. I mean, whether you're a janitor or you're a CEO of a company or you're the rector of a church, never discount your role in the world.
Mhm. There was there was a gathering in Chicago that I was at. There was a presenter who had done some work with family of Martin Luther King Jr. And she was talking about a moment of revelation for her, where she had been in a career, a job situation, but it was just eating her alive. And part of it was the relationship with this one supervisor, and it was getting really ugly. And she talked to her pastor about it. Well, it might not have even been a pastor. It might have just been a member of the congregation that she was with, but had that kind of way of thinking spiritually about things. And this person responded to her and said, you know, it's not just the job, and it's not just this relationship with this person. It's about principalities and powers. And this just opened up a kind of whole different world of way of thinking about her situation, about how there were forces that had moral valence to them in her work situation, and that she had a choice about how to respond and how to continue in that setting or not. And that opened the doorway for some deep vocational discernment for her as well. So these little seeds are important, and it's not that I never take the evangelical route that your conversation is the one that matters and it's the end of the line here. It's no, we are all those weird little farmers that are in the sower, the parable of the sower, that are just casting out seeds. Doesn't matter what the ground is, but we have to be generous that way. And you just don't know what that little seed will do, but it's a gift.
I'm really struck with this idea about inviting, which I will own, made me a little bit nervous. And not being shy, being gentle, but not being shy. And the triangle and my story, your story, the great story. And an element that I think is so important that this diocese has spent time doing is really articulating our why. And I don't remember, I wasn't here, but in 2018 or 2019, that was really the bishop's kind of focus and urge for this diocese is knowing our why Jesus, why the Episcopal Church for us. And I think this really pushes us to do that work and to keep doing it better. Because if I know why this great story matters to me on a Thursday night and not just on a Sunday morning, I can better and more courageously do that inviting. And so I'm also then really excited about the fact that we're spending this coming year 2023 really talking about who is Jesus. Because I don't want to lean so heavily on being PC that I don't talk about this thing that has been life-changing, transformative for me forever, and continues to be, and sort of find that balance of being gently, curiously inviting. That's hard and really good work. So I'm seeing all these little connectors through what you just presented to us, and this work around our why that Bishop Gretchen invited us into, and now where we're moving with this, spending a year really digging into who Jesus is. Exciting stuff.
That's great. There's a resource that I was part of putting together with some of the folks at the Church Center in New York, called Embracing Evangelism, that built off of my book and built off of Stephanie Speller's book and built off of some of what the presiding bishop's done and some other people. And so it walks through exercises, and you get to actually see, it's like a master class sort of, and then you do it yourselves. So it's a good resource that a congregation can use. It's called Embracing Evangelism. Yeah, what was my contrast to shy again? Gentle, but don't be shy. What is your shy about is a good reflective question. Sometimes I think our shy is a form of paternalism or maternalism. We're overly taking care of someone else's possible reaction that they haven't had yet, but they might. So, God forbid I should, right. So, we're not actually honoring the autonomy and agency of the other person in that case. So,
David,
yes.
I think there's a nonverbal approach to this as well. At almost before we open our mouths, how we look at other people, include them, what our body language is. Anybody who's seen that Joy film about the Dalai Lama, the little episode where little boy Desmond Tutu is reading a book while his mother's hanging laundry that she's doing for this church thing, and the priest comes out and he goes over to speak to her. Now he's white, she's black, and he takes off his beretta, and he's a tall guy, so it doesn't, this may have been incidental, but he seems to sort of bow to her a bit to speak with her. And this little boy sees a white man being respectful to his mother in a way that just blew his mind, and look what came of it. And I think there are, for people, ways to start these encounters by just being very aware of, like, without being obnoxious about it, don't pass people by without acknowledging that they're there. I mean, years ago, working in San Francisco, there was a guy who was very involved with the Episcopal ministry to the homeless. And he said, these people live on the street. When you walk on the sidewalk, you're walking through their living room. The least you could do is look them in the eye and say hello. Treat them like human beings, that they are there and they do belong, even if they only belong on the sidewalk in a sense. Give them that sense of that you see them, and they matter in that. And I think if we even start with that sometimes before we figure out how to open our mouths appropriately, it's that we haven't, established an appropriate presence yet, in a sense. How do you talk to a person you're not sure you really want to have be there, or have allowed to be there, or whatever?
Right. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. There was one of my students who was really remarkable at this. He was in the Franciscan order in the Episcopal Church, and he had a way of being with people that went beyond his robe that he was wearing. Just some of the exchanges that he had was because of how people felt, because of how he approached them. And some of it was, well, a good amount of it was the nonverbal signals. What else you have thoughts on?
I had a small miracle. Does that help?
Yeah.
We have a church with no building. We live outside of the senior center, and the young woman, or youngish woman, who is our piano player, is a very shy lady, and she has been taking on students on the internet. So she asked me if I would join her because she was meeting a group of people she didn't know. And so we went to McDonald's, and this fascinating group of, and mother and daughters arrived. And I wasn't really part of the conversation. I just sort of sat back and listened. But one of the things the girls said was, we'd like to learn how to sing church music. So I thought, okay. So I'm driving her back, said, okay, what do we do about that? And she said, oh, I don't know. I don't know them very well. I said, well, if it comes up, I have a church, you have a student. Maybe we could do something with this. And by the way, if it falls flat on its face, it's my problem. And if it's a success, it's your success. That's happening on the 18th of December. Anybody who'd like to come, there are 5 of them coming with guitars and
Fantastic.
all sorts of music. And I think they may be RCs, these people. I don't know. I really didn't ask. But it just was a wonderful opportunity. Now we can invite other people to our Christmas service, which happens to be on the 18th because the senior center is going to be open on the 25th. So I went to the Meals on Wheels and said, hey, you guys, we're having a service on the 18th. If you want to join us, that'd be cool. And we'll see what happens. And it may be a complete belly flop, or it may be absolutely brilliant. And either one would be a good learning thing to do.
That's beautiful, though. Just the kind of open, pretty carefree invitation into partnership, into try something out. Let's do this together.
When you're in a senior center, it's easy to be open. There's very little genuflecting going on, I think. I'll tell you when next month how it works out.
That's
Oh, you can
wonderful.
tell.
So one of the things I'd invite you to maybe take back, yes, the conversation piece is a big piece, and invitation and partnership, but that last piece about like launch planning, what is it that is unique and distinctive and really central about your faith community and about the way you experience your life in Christ? Yeah, thank you, Diane. Yeah, gentleness and kindness. Yeah. What is it that stands out? And maybe it's what is it that stands out that may be a contrast to some other faith communities around you? That's important for people to know. And for you to claim. And that's good stuff for a vestry, bishops committee to chew on together. All right. I don't have any more tonight. I think that's enough. Yeah.
I think this was great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Happy to do more with you again on this.
Good. Thanks.
It's like an old saw, I keep, I know how to do this a little bit. So
Good. Have a great evening. Thank you very much.
yeah.
Rest well.
God bless everyone.
Good night.
Good night, you guys. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Get the recording, Sarah.